for Suella Braverman, please. A round of applause. Thank you. And of course, who better to lead this conversation than a three-time MP himself? Please welcome parliamentarian and author Dr. Shashi Tharoor. This is going to be a fantastic conversation, I promise you. I'd first like to request Ms. Braverman to please join us at the podium for her opening remarks. Welcome again.
Good morning, Ideas of India. Great to see you after a fantastic musical performance and celebration yesterday evening. It's a great honor to speak at the Ideas of India Summit today here in Mumbai. And I want to put on record my thanks to the organizers for putting together a magnificent schedule of thought-provoking discussions and meetings that I am sure will be fruitful in many ways. And in my brief introductory comments, I want to just say that for me, whilst I'm proud to be born and bred in Wembley in the United Kingdom, sometimes known as a Little India, schooled and worked for a decade as a barrister in England, and now representing the beautiful parliamentary constituency of Fareham in Hampshire in the UK Parliament, I love India. India is in my heart. India is in my heart, she's in my soul, and she's in my blood. I'm proud to be part of the living bridge and one of the millions of British Asians who form the global Indian diaspora. I'm second-generation immigrant in Britain. My father was born in Nairobi in Kenya in the 1940s, but he has his roots in Asagao and Kalangut in Goa, where his ancestral home is and where his family still lives. His younger brother, Father Iris Fernandez, works as a priest in Delhi today, and he has previously worked for the Catholic bishops in India. And my mother is from Mauritius. She's proud to have been recruited by the NHS, the National Health Service, when she was just 18 to train and work as a nurse in the UK, a job that she did for 45 years. Her Hindu ancestors originate from India, and they traveled to Mauritius in the 1840s as indentured labor to work on the sugar plantations in Mauritius. So that's some of the history of my family. But for me, some of my earliest memories, personally, are from India too. When I was 3, my mother and my granny went on a grand tour of India because they too love India. And they took me along for 6 weeks. They were very brave. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I don't think I would take her on a grand tour of any country right now. And we traveled then in the 1980s the length and breadth of India, from Calcutta to Kanyakumari. And for me, one of my earliest memories of life itself is when I was sitting as a young child, a 3-year-old, with my granny, whose name was Tulsi, who was a Hare Krishna devotee, at the temple in Vrindavan, a construction of unparalleled beauty. And she is sewing garlands made from the sweet-smelling yellow, red, and orange marigolds. And the oasis of calm and serenity, with the intoxicating aroma, the mystery of the spiritual, and the buzz of activity in the background, and the warm Indian sunshine, encapsulate what my first vision of India was. As an adult, 30 years later, I traveled around India myself with a backpack on my back about 10 years ago. And that's where I saw how transformed India had become. The enterprise, the innovation, the development, and the success that India has achieved, that you have achieved, is astounding. And I want to take this opportunity to applaud you and your fellow countrymen for achieving so much success in such a short time. From achieving the first landing by the Chandrayaan-3 mission on the moon's south pole, the victory cry of a new India, the presidency of the G20 last year, when we saw a new approach to multilateralism led by India, which meant a new voice for the global south in the international discourse. On digital public infrastructure, India has been decisive in her leadership, having witnessed the revolutionary impact of digital innovations like Aadhaar, UPI, and DigiLocker firsthand. And as the world's largest democracy, with the fastest growing economy in the world, with the IMF updating India's economic growth to 6.5% for both 2024 and 2025. Let me just say, figures that we look at jealously in the UK. There is huge amount to be excited about and optimistic about when it comes to India's future on the world stage. And I haven't even mentioned your cricket prowess, which has caused us in recent months a lot of pain and sadness in the UK. Although I note the UK is making a very noble comeback in today's and recent matches. Now, given India's significance internationally, this year will be one in which India may play an important role diplomatically and politically. With over 60 general elections around the world, including in the USA and UK, both, if the current polling is right, marking a change in administration. We have wars in Europe and the Middle East, global challenges relating to COVID recovery, energy supply challenges, terrorism, and global migration movements of an unprecedented scale. There is opportunity for both countries, like the UK and India, to collaborate and work together on the world stage. That is why post-Brexit United Kingdom heralds a great opportunity for a UK-India trade deal that works for both our nations. To double trade to potentially £86 billion, doubling your exports and increasing UK investment in India, particularly in sectors like infrastructure, renewable energy, healthcare, and education. And I very much hope that our two nations will be able to secure a mutually beneficial UK-India trade deal. Now, from the UK perspective, and to give you an update from my country, we are focusing on the forthcoming general election, which will take place later this year. Our economy is recovering well post-COVID, with inflation falling by over half and unemployment low. There has been record levels of investment in our public services, such as the NHS and schools, such that today literacy standards in English schools have improved dramatically in the last 10 years by global standards. Now, from the Home Affairs brief, which has been my role in recent years, we now have a record number of police officers working on the front line in England and Wales, something that I delivered when I was Home Secretary. We recruited an extra 20,000 new police officers. And we passed new laws relating to public order, national security, overhauling our outdated espionage laws, and illegal migration, a challenge that we remain committed to fixing urgently in the United Kingdom. Post-Brexit, we have joined the CPTPP and taken a more deregulatory approach to business, thanks to our ability to diverge from rules emanating from the European Union. And militarily, we have maintained our 2.5% of GDP investment into our defence as the NATO standard, and developed new security and defence partnerships with Australia and the USA through AUKUS to develop the next generation of nuclear-powered submarines. So, to conclude, it's clear that we all live in exciting times in both the UK and India, and I look forward to spending time with you today and ongoing as we explore the vast array of topical issues on the itinerary. Thank you.
Thank you, Suella. That was extremely interesting, and I must say that for many who are familiar with the media image you have and the sort of reputation that it was developed, particularly during your 2 stints as Home Secretary, your remarks will come as a very pleasant surprise. I must say that many of us would not have expected to hear you speak so warmly of India and Indians, and that's already, I think, a very welcome start to our conversation. But one piece of news I have to give you all, since she mentioned our cricket prowess, is that we are really getting a pasting this morning in Ranchi from the English with a number 9 batsman, Ollie Robinson, scoring a 50 and just clobbering us all over the place. So I'm afraid the series lead looks in danger of evaporating. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Except that you mentioned it. But let me go back to the pleasant surprise of your remarks, because we have to admit that as far as many people who follow British politics in India are concerned, you have been portrayed, perhaps caricatured, you'll have to say, as almost a self-hating Indian, somebody who has been anti the free trade deal because it's going to facilitate more immigration from India, somebody who has been so tough on migration, both legal and illegal, that some of the less kind terms about you include a play on your name, Cruella. Now, you'll have to tell us, do your remarks this morning represent a departure from that, or is it simply an unfair portrayal of what you really believe?
Well, Shashi, thank you very much for those warm words, and I'm glad to hear the welcome from you. Listen, I've been in politics, in elected politics, for nearly a decade now. Mm-hmm. And there is always the cut and thrust of political debate. And you develop, as you will know, I'm sure, Shashi, a thick skin. And so, you know, media labels really are neither here or there. What matters is delivery for the British people. And what I've been very concerned about in the UK, and particularly in my role as Home Secretary, and I actually know that the Prime Minister shares this commitment, is tackling the very challenging problem that we have in the United Kingdom right now, that of unprecedented illegal migration. In 2022, we had 45,000 people cross the English Channel on a dinghy illegally, and they didn't have the legal right to be in the UK. They were leaving a safe country like France, and they have come into the United Kingdom, jumping the queue and undermining our border security. This is an issue of pressing salience in the United Kingdom. The British people are frustrated with what they see on our southern border. It's something that has occurred in recent years, pretty much post-Brexit, and it's something that the government really must fix. I know the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, feels very committed to fixing it, and I share that commitment. And so I think I've been attempting to reflect the very strong concerns that the majority of British people feel about illegal migration in the United Kingdom. We need to take a firm but fair approach. Ultimately, it's a humanitarian challenge because people are dying. People are dying in the Channel to get to the United Kingdom. They're being exploited by criminal gangs, people smugglers. They're often vulnerable people, but they're also abusing and exploiting our immigration rules. It's something that cannot continue. And as a politician, that's been the issue of most salience that I've had to deal with.
But you have argued that illegal immigration is the single biggest threat to Europe, but you've also argued, unless I've misread you, that legal immigration depresses average wages, increases costs due to the impact on public services, and reduces, therefore, GDP per capita. And isn't that paradoxical given the very history you mentioned in your speech when you talked about your parents coming to the UK? Is it a case of somebody climbing on board the boat and wanting to pull up the ladder behind them so nobody else can come?
No, it's not. And I'll tell you the first point I need to make here in this whole discussion about immigration. The United Kingdom, and my personal experience, that of my parents, bears this out, is an extremely welcoming country to migrants. We have, I think, an enviable track record of welcoming thousands, if not millions of people over the decades and indeed the centuries. Whether it's in recent years, we've welcomed over 500,000 people from abroad into the United Kingdom seeking refuge, people from Hong Kong, over 100,000 people from Ukraine, people from Syria, people who have found sanctuary in the United Kingdom. And I'm very proud of the Conservative government's track record on that, extending the hand of friendship and sanctuary to those most needy in the world, providing humanitarian protection. Or whether, even if you look back decades ago, the story of my father and my mother. My father, as I mentioned earlier, came to the United Kingdom in 1968, kicked out of Kenya as a young man. He was 19 years old. He went to the United Kingdom with nothing, no money, no family, no connections, and he made his life in the UK. Or my mother, recruited by the NHS as a girl of 18 in the 1960s, flown to Aberdeen in Scotland, training as a nurse and working for the NHS for 45 years. They're so proud of being British. They're so grateful to Britain for the home that Britain provided them and the opportunities. And if you look at the levels of migration today, they are simply unsustainable. Now, put aside the issue of illegal migration, let's focus on legal migration, which is what you asked about, Shashi. Last year, net migration into the United Kingdom stood at 700,000. That's an increase from 240,000 in 2019. Now that kind of number, these kinds of numbers, people coming into our country legally on a work visa, on a student visa, on a family basis, is not sustainable when you look at the resources and the capacity that the United Kingdom has. Now, this is not to take away from the generosity and the track record that I pointed out, but we also have to look at the fact that we do need some effective border control. We do have finite resources in the United Kingdom. Our NHS is under strain because of rapid increase in our population, in part caused by inward migration. We don't have enough school places for the population increase, caused in part by inward migration. And the pace of increase into the United Kingdom of inward migration is causing strain on communities because of cultural tensions, and I think very importantly, possibly most importantly, on housing supply and house prices. Speak to young people in the United Kingdom today, and they will say to you one of the number one issues, or one of the top issues that they face, is being able to afford a home. That's critical to their life chances, because if you can't put down the deposit for a home because prices are extortionate and it's just out of your range, you cannot think about starting a family. You cannot think about settling down and moving on and laying down roots and becoming a stakeholder in society. Home ownership is a pressing challenge for us in the United Kingdom, and the insufficiency of supply of housing is directly connected to the exponential rise in population, due in part, at least, to unprecedented levels of net migration. So legal migration, of course, we are welcoming to migrants and we are proud of our heritage of welcoming people from abroad, but we also have to do that with an attitude of pragmatism, balance, and fairness.
Well, the only concern is, of course, that given how successful migrants have been in the UK, and especially the Ugandan Asian diaspora, has produced so many millionaires and other success stories who in turn have generated jobs in Britain and so on, isn't yours a somewhat retrograde attitude towards people coming in? I mean, I remember when I spent 11 years working for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, we would have a poster out that said, a bundle of belongings isn't the only thing a refugee or a migrant brings to their home country. Einstein was a refugee. And I think it's anyway, I mean, I take your point, I wouldn't want you to repeat it again, but it seems to me that your critics are basically arguing that there are a lot of people who've done well, but you're preventing others from having the chance to do well and contribute to the UK.
I dispute that. I think, you know, as I said, the UK is very proud of welcoming people from abroad. And what we want to create post-Brexit, I think this is an important factor in the debate, the Brexit vote in 2016 in the United Kingdom was a vote to leave the European Union. I campaigned and I voted to leave the European Union because I wanted to lower the numbers of inward migration. The 2019 general election in the United Kingdom made clear in our manifesto that we would lower overall numbers when it came to migration. We have a mandate from the British people to lower overall numbers of net migration. It's what the British people have voted for time and time again. It's incumbent on governments to deliver that. So one, we have a mandate, it's what the British people want. And secondly, of course, we welcome and we want to welcome the best and the brightest to the United Kingdom. We want to develop a high-skilled, high-wage economy, and we want to ensure that people with the talent, with the goodwill, and with the right attitude are welcome to come and work in the United Kingdom and contribute to the prosperity of both our countries. I don't think that is anathema to my message on lowering overall numbers of net migration.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you mentioned the free trade agreement very positively, but you've been a critic of it in the past, particularly because of your concern that while Britain has lots of goods that you want India to reduce tariffs on under an FTA, India would want to offer you people, and people is something you don't want to take. Have you changed your mind on that?
Listen, I think if you look at our record following our departure from the European Union, the UK has done exceptionally well. We've struck over 70 free trade agreements with other nations around the world, something many critics said would never be possible. And these are mutually beneficial free trade agreements. And free trade really is the cornerstone to global prosperity and development for humanity, actually. And so I would definitely support a mutually beneficial, that's the key, a mutually beneficial free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and India. And I'm sure you would say the same, Shashi. So we always need to negotiate. And I'm sure common ground can be found, but it is clear that we do have to maintain border control in the United Kingdom. We do need to get overall net migration numbers down. As I said, we have an instruction from the British electorate to do that. And so to undermine that would be a dereliction of duty.
Okay, so let me move on to another aspect that's of much interest in this country. You've called yourself a proud child of empire, and you've actually said that the empire was responsible for establishing the rule of law in their former colonies. Now, many of us in India have a very different view of empire, and I'm certainly amongst the more notorious critics of everything to do with empire, including the claim of rule of law, which was in fact administered in the colonies in the most appallingly one-sided and racist manner. How would you today look at the overall record? Do you still feel that India should be happy to have been ruled by the British?
I think this is where we get to the nub of why you were invited and why I was invited to share a platform, Shashi. Because I've noted your very well chronicled views, and we somewhat disagree, but I hope we have some commonality as well. Listen, when you look back on history, and I don't claim to be a historian, I claim to observe events from the experience of my parents who were born under the British Empire in Mauritius and Kenya, and what I have read myself. But I don't think we can look back on history in binary terms. I think things are always nuanced. There is always good and there is always bad. And I think judging our forefathers and the fathers of our fathers of our fathers of our fathers by contemporary standards is always a difficult juggling act. So I am, of course there were aspects about the empire which many people will have found abhorrent, but also it can be true that the British did leave behind the railways and the ports and the civil service and the administration.
All of which were instituted in order to perpetuate British rule in India and enhance British profits. Not one of them had anything to do with the well-being of Indians in India. And that's the point that we are... I mean, I understand your role as a British politician in Britain, but it is, for me, a matter of some concern that too many British politicians, now one of Indian origin, are allowing the past to be seen in this rosy sort of way, when in fact it's something that actually calls for an apology to the people who have suffered as much as Indians have over the 200 years. And I just want you to understand that when you stand up and say, oh, I'm a proud child of empire, a lot of us feel more than a twinge of pain at the reality of empire having been essentially denied. And don't forget, even to this day, Britain doesn't have anywhere in that wonderful city of museums, London, a museum to colonialism that shows the entire experience of the colonized people. You can do an A-levels in history without learning a line of colonial history. Britain has successfully airbrushed its unsavory actions to the point where your colleague Liam Fox was actually able to assert that Britain is one country in the world that has nothing to be ashamed of in the 20th century. And the 20th century is full of British atrocities, including the massacre of 1,300 people in Jallianwala Bagh and the extraordinary callousness that led to the Great Bengal Famine of 43 and 44. There's a lot for Britain to apologize for, and we haven't had that apology yet. So I just wanted to park that thought. I'm not getting you to sit here and apologize now, but I do think that you really will have to look at the record a little more fully before you make statements like being a proud child of empire.
Well, I mean, as you would imagine, I disagree with your interpretation of events. Of course, there are many aspects of history which cannot be condoned and must be condemned. But I also do think that if we look at the present and the future, India is a great example of a country where self-governance has been a great success, and post-empire, India has embraced everything that was left and excelled, and beyond expectations. So I think looking forward and looking at the Commonwealth, this has been a great, the Commonwealth is a great relationship and a great community of nations which have a historic link and which can look to the future and work collaboratively for the future. But I also think that looking at my, I still do maintain I am a proud child. My parents were born under the empire. They are incredibly grateful for what the British did in Mauritius and in Kenya, and that they were beneficiaries. They were beneficiaries both of what Britain did in their countries of origin, but also of what Britain has done for them when they moved to Britain
Suella,
and lived in the United Kingdom.
Was an indentured labourer. Do you have any idea of the conditions under which they lived? They're far worse than slavery. But we can talk about, they weren't exactly, merrily going off getting a visa to do good work in immigration. They were being press-ganged into forced labor. But all right, let me move on, because I've got to ask you a question that I keep getting asked, including on this very stage yesterday, in terms of my party, and that's about your party. You're facing an election, as you mentioned in your remarks. Are you doomed to inevitable defeat?
Well, I mean, it is, the UK Conservative Party is facing a challenging time. Just last week, there were 2 by-elections, and unfortunately, the Conservative Party lost control of those seats. Every poll that we are looking at does predict a defeat at the general election. So I am very concerned about the direction that the Conservative Party is taking in government, and I have urged a change of course, because I very much want this Conservative government to win, and I very much want to keep Keir Starmer out of number 10. But I do think that, ultimately, despite the gloomy prospects set out in the polling, which is very difficult evidence to deny, I do believe we can still win the next general election. In the United Kingdom, the Labour Party is tearing itself apart over an issue relating to foreign policy on Gaza and the Middle East. And the Labour Party would be a disaster for the United Kingdom economically, in terms of security terms and defence, and in terms of our world standing. So I very much hope and will work very hard to secure a Conservative victory at the general election, but you're right. I mean, it does look very, very difficult right now on the basis of the polling.
The world, of course, is seen in many ways as moving in a particular direction, and you have rather trenchantly said that you are against left-wing idiocy because it's divisive, disempowering, and dangerous. Now, as you know, the left would say exactly the same thing about right-wing extreme points of view. Isn't there a case for avoiding divisive, disempowering, and dangerous points of view on either side and trying to find common ground? Are you not positioning yourself at one extreme of a spectrum of division, which actually needs to, you talked about this bridge between the two countries, shouldn't there also be a bridge between the 2 points of view?
Well, I agree that on the extremes of any debate, you will often find irrational and extreme views, and the far right is just as abhorrent as the far left. What I would say about the left-wing idiocy that I complain about is that we are seeing left-wing idiocy in the heart of the Labour Party. That's the problem. And the way this manifests itself in terms of Labour Party policy is that they are a party that would promote something called the Race Equality Act. We don't need a Race Equality Act because we have very good race relations in the United Kingdom, and we have very good protections in law already for people from ethnic minorities. It's virtue signalling, it's political correctness, it's trying to divide our society. We've also seen the rise of identity politics in the United Kingdom, generally prosecuted by the left wing, and it's manifested itself in debates around gender ideology. So we've had people be arrested for saying that a man can't be a woman. Now forgive me, again, I'm no professor of biology, but to my mind, a man cannot be a woman. And that is a fundamental of biology, and yet the transgender lobby, the gender ideology extremists have been very militant in their campaigning on this issue. Now, we support the rights of transgender people. We want everybody to live in a safe and secure way in the United Kingdom, but we mustn't conduct this debate in a way that has a chilling effect on freedom of speech. Or when it comes to race, we've had discussions about institutional racism. That's a notion with which I disagree. I don't believe that it's right to say that the police are institutionally racist. That would smear tens of thousands of people who are not so. We've had the BLM movement in the United Kingdom. BLM stands for Black Lives Matter, and people taking the knee. The BLM movement would defund the police, and they want to overthrow capitalism. And yet we have people in positions of authority backing the BLM movement. We've had militant eco-protesters in the United Kingdom taking over our highways and slow walking and causing considerable disruption through militant protests. So we've got this theme and trend of left-wing activism, which is having a corrosive effect on freedom of speech and common sense and British values.
Thank you, Suella. I see a warning that the time is up, but I thought we had 15 minutes extra for this session. Is that right? Do I carry on? In any case, I've got two quick questions still left for Suella, so I'll go for those. One of the I think important issues is you mentioned in your speech that you've overhauled outdated espionage laws. Can you tell us what was outdated about them and what the changes would bring about?
Yes, when I was Home Secretary, we passed the National Security Act last year, and that was to upgrade and reform our outdated espionage laws. We've previously been subject to the Official Secrets Act, and those are somewhat old statutes in the United Kingdom, and we reformed some of those provisions to make our frameworks much more nimble and agile for our security agencies. We face in the world growing threats from hostile states such as China, Russia, and Iran, and it's right that our professionals working on the front line of domestic security have the ability to respond in a nimble and flexible way to those emerging threats.
Okay, but you're talking about espionage by the UK or in the UK?
In the UK, by hostile states.
By other countries, okay, I get it. One of the issues that have divided the right and the left, of course, in this country as well as yours, is this question of religion in politics. And you have accused asylum seekers of faking conversions to Christianity to be more acceptable. You have criticized rising Islamism in the UK. And you've today in your speech reminded us that you have ancestry of both Catholic on one side and Hindu on the other side. In your personal life, you're a practicing Buddhist. So would you not instinctively be a pluralist on religion rather than be ranged on the side of those who are, shall we say, demonizing exotic religions like Islam and so on in the UK? I'm just curious because we have a similar debate going on here. Many of us feel that religion is a private affair for the individual, has nothing to do with government policy, and should be kept out of politics. But here you had yourself made comments about religion in your political career. So I'm just trying to understand that.
Yes, I mean, I do tend to agree that religion is a private matter for the individual, and really there should be a somewhat level of separation between that and politics. But the comment I was making was about a structural and systemic and policy matter that we've identified in recent years and something I found when I was Home Secretary. And this goes back to my comment about illegal migration. And what we've seen in recent years is many people come to the UK, sometimes illegally, and claim asylum. And the grounds for their asylum have really been fabricated. And they have potentially been Muslim people. This is not in all cases, but the kind of typical case study we've found in the United Kingdom. Someone has come from a Muslim country. They are themselves actually Muslim, and they have claimed to have converted to Christianity as a way of pleading refugee status, because they say on the basis of their Christian conversion, if they were to be removed to their Muslim country of origin, they claim that they would be persecuted. And so religion, namely the Christian church, has been exploited by asylum seekers or illegal migrants. And what we've identified in recent years is a trend whereby people are being able to fake their Christian conversion quite easily through the Christian church and then claim asylum and have that be the basis upon which they can stay in the United Kingdom. We just had a very tragic case, unfortunately, in the United Kingdom of a man called Ezidi who had come to the United Kingdom illegally several years earlier, and he claimed asylum. He had come from a Muslim country, and he claimed asylum. He was refused his claim for asylum. He went on to commit a sex offence and was committed of sexual offences. He was a convicted sex offender in the United Kingdom. He then claimed asylum again for the third time. This time, he claimed that he had converted to Christianity. And there is a suggestion that he had done that in a way which was false. He did it, he pretended to be a Christian. He was granted asylum, it is understood, on the basis of his Christian conversion. He thereafter, it's alleged, went on to commit further offences in a tragic way, throwing acid on a woman. And that lady had to go to hospital, a child was hospitalised, and a horrendous act of violence was committed afterwards. And the United Kingdom has been outraged by what has been seen as an exploitation of our migration rules.
Nothing to do with his religion, but more to do with his act of violence.
So what we've seen is, the question is, why was that man, a convicted sex offender, allowed to stay in the United Kingdom? He was allowed to stay in the United Kingdom because he pleaded that he had converted to Christianity, and that was a false basis. So our system is not rigorous enough, and it needs to be fixed.
I see your point. All right, well, that's a different, in any case, that's an individual case. I know there's one issue you did want to briefly address before we wrapped up. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing the world today?
Well, I think there are many challenges affecting global security right now. And if you look at the war in Ukraine and Putin's invasion of Ukraine, or if you look at what's happening in the Middle East, there are real threats to global security. If we look at the Middle East, Israel endured one of the most atrocious acts of brutality that it's seen in decades by the terrorist group Hamas. It's also under attack from Hezbollah. And Israel has the right to defend herself within the limits of international law, of course. But those calls for an immediate ceasefire are naive and dangerous. And I want to make clear that I'm against those calls for an immediate ceasefire, because this war in the Middle East could stop tomorrow. If Hamas laid down their arms, if Hamas returned the hostages that they still hold in captivity illegally, and if Hamas committed to peace. That's how we get an immediate ceasefire. It is not for Israel to unilaterally disarm in the face of an imminent and immediate threat posed by Hamas in Gaza.
But Suella, the 29,800 civilians have been killed in this Israeli bombing in Gaza, including thousands of women and children. Is this something you really want to see continuing? What's wrong with the humanitarian ceasefire while the other things are worked out?
Well, of course, humanitarian protection should be provided for civilians.
International law requires it.
And that is why there is more that other countries might be able to do, like Egypt. And Israel itself have made provision for the humanitarian aspects of this conflict. But let's be clear, Hamas have been unrelenting in their attacks on Israel, brutal to the extreme in unspeakable ways, and they would do it again. And Hamas leaders, Hamas operatives, are holed up in all parts of Gaza, but also in Rafah. And so it's incumbent on any self-respecting government to do what it needs to do to protect its citizens. Israel is currently under constant and violent attack from Hamas. And therefore, it does need to protect itself. It does need to eliminate Hamas. And we need to maintain our support for Israel in that endeavor.
Right. I take your point. I think respectfully, some of us will disagree with you on aspects of that, but we can talk about it later. The warning sign is here. Just an update since we began with Suella's rueful reference to India's cricketing prowess against England. And I said we were getting pasted this morning when I said that England were 347 for 7 in pretty much record time. I'm pleased to let you know that India's taken those last 3 wickets and England are 353 all out. So we might yet redress the balance. The empire strikes back, Suella. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for Suella Braverman.
Well, what a match of equals this has been. Thank you very much for leading that conversation, Dr. Tharoor and Ms. Braverman. Thank you for taking on those sharp questions from Dr. Tharoor and answering them with such candor. I'd request you to please stay on stage as I invite Avinash Pandey, CEO, ABP Network, to join us and present you with a token of our immense gratitude for your presence here today. Let's hear it for the wonderful Suella Braverman and Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Avinash, for doing the honors. Well, what a wonderful, brilliant, engaging first session of the day that has been, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, on this stage, we are talking about different ideas of India to build a new India. And when we look at building the best version of India, it becomes important to look back on how we got to the present. Reimagining India involves rethinking traditional approaches to governance, economy, society,